Welcome to Confronting the Line. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be considered legal, medical, or mental health advice. We speak from our personal experiences and opinions. The views expressed are solely those of the individual speaker and are not intended to malign any group, club, organization, or business.
All right, everybody. Well, welcome to Confronting the Line. And I'm excited tonight to welcome back our resident expert, was the name we gave Ed. So in addition to being a neuropsychologist and a consultant and trainer in many areas and disciplines, for me, Ed is one of the people who reached out to me after reading my book to really share all about, he was there at the beginning of the forum, right? The transition in the landmark organization from S to the forum, was a trainer. But more than that, has been working in the field of transformational technologies, training most all of your career, and has participated in a lot of different ways in which transformational or personal development technologies gets delivered in organizations to individuals and whatnot. So one of the things that came up in our last chat with Ed was just in mention was the 6-day. And the 6-day, for those of you who don't know, is this sort of really famous, for me, it lives like lore. I came into the landmark Werner sphere in 1995 or so, and the 6-day was one of those things that was sort of part of the history. And as I was working with senior graduates that followed that work all the way from the S days, the Werner Erhard days, and so on, I would often hear these like stories about the 6-day. It was the best program ever, and all kinds of stuff. And we'll kind of get into it in this episode. So Ed was there, and you were, I think, Ed, you told me this morning, you actually were one of the trainers. Yeah.
There were two levels of trainers. There were full trainers, and we went by different names: co-trainers, backup trainers. We led certain parts of the program. We were always in the room, but there were parts of the program that we led. And plus, I trained people for that role.
Gotcha. So Ed, you're a little bit quiet to me, so I'm going to ask you to kind of be as close to your microphone as you can, just to help equalize our sound there. I'll maybe turn mine down. Gotcha. So there was kind of, it sounds like there was a group of you. Well, let's kind of, we're going to just jump right in. We did invite some folks to join us today in the live studio audience, and we'll give you an opportunity to throw your questions into the mix. Some people shared with me ahead of time some of their questions. You know, those of us that came along and did programs after all of that, you know, like I said, I've always kind of been curious about what was all this stuff. And I think the 6-day was a really unique program in its time. So can you give us what was the time period of the 6-day? Like, when did it start? When did it end? Do you know?
I'm not quite sure when it started. I did it in 78.
Okay.
And it had been going for a while. So I would say it started sometime in the early to mid 70s. And it went until about 84, 85, about the time there was a small overlap, as I remember, and I'm depending on memory here, there was a small overlap between the forum and the 6-day when both were being done and the training had been retired. But the 6-day, we talked about adjusting it to the forum, but we never could quite see how to do that. It was a very different kind of program.
Right. So, well, that's great. That's a great lead in to kind of a main question. So, and just for those of you that might be listening that are kind of fairly new to this, you can go back and listen to some of the previous discussions with Ed where he fills this in on that.
My son, who's in the audience, just corrected me that it went until at least 1990. So there was more overlap than I remembered. Because he was there in the summer of 89. He was, my son Eric, who's in the audience, was probably, if not one of the youngest, maybe the youngest person ever to be on 6-day staff when he was young. And so he's joining us and is going to back channel to me if he has anything to add. He didn't.
Eric, that's awesome.
He wanted to be in the audience tonight.
That's great.
like you want to be on camera
Well,
about it.
you know what I found out today too, Ed? My our business partner in our real estate development work, who was a long time, did the S training and so on, and and you start talking to people. A lot of people did the S training, especially in the United States. Like a lot. It was very very famous, very popular. I was listening to a sitcom the other day, and they were making jokes about the S training. And so the S training started in 1971, I believe, as I've been studying this. And the first one was in 1971. And then that was the primary training that really launched Werner Erhard, right? And his organization, his people. So, and became quite a pop culture sensation of its time, which was 1971. And then it was retired in, do you remember the year approximately?
84.
84. And that was when the forum was created and under the Werner Erhard and Associates. And then the forum in 1990, 1991, kind of that transaction takes about a year, gets transferred over into what we now know as Landmark Education. And so that's kind of like the basics. So the 6-day was a program that was created. Can you tell us anything about the origins of it? Like, where did it come from? And then let's get into kind of what it was.
My understanding, and again, I wasn't there until a few years later, but the person who's generally credited, always has been, with creating the 6-day was a man called Landon Carter, who was one of the first trainers. And he led my 6-day, in fact, in 79, excuse me. And the thing was unique. One of the many things that was unique about the 6-day was Werner he was very interested in it. He came, he showed up at the 6-day a number of times, but he really was not that directly involved in it. Landon, I'm sure with Werner's input and approval and everything else, designed it. And it was run from Landon on until it ended. It was the primary accountability for it was with trainers. So Hal Eisen, Jerry Joyner, Ron Bynum, different trainers at different times had the accountability for the 6-day, and they trained other trainers to lead it. I don't think I was I was one of the early co-leaders. I'm not sure what they did before that, but they oversaw and trained the co-leaders, and there was also a parallel program that went on during the 6-day called the Assistance Training Program, ATP for short, and that also was pretty unique because unlike most assisting programs, which were basically unpaid help, justified in the name of training, and there was some training involved as well.
That's the whole assisting program.
But the assistant training program was a true training program. I mean, you met beforehand. Generally, a given ATP would come from one center or nearby centers, and they'd meet beforehand for several weeks. They would have homework, things to work on. We'd get to the site, and a good part of the time on site was spent in training, mainly around the main thrust of the 6-day for everybody. So there'd be 100 participants and 100 assistants. Maybe not that many assistants, except on ropes day, which we'll get to. But the main thing of the 6-day was going beyond your limits. That was the key theme of it. Physically, emotionally, psychologically, spiritually, relationally, all of that. And so the assistance training program focused on teamwork, integrity, and going beyond your limits, and leadership as well.
Now that brings up an interesting. So your the assistance training program, if I understood you correctly, you're saying was an integral part or of the 6 day program, so to speak. But by this time, wasn't were there also assistants supporting the S training, and then
Of
ultimately,
course,
then later
there
the
were
form.
from the
I'm
beginning.
curious about what's different between those two because it sounds like you're saying there's this really well laid out um, more actually more emphasis on formal training as it were
That's
from
right.
what I experienced. I did my first assisting agreement, which is what volunteering is called in Landmark. So one of my first assisting agreements was the month after I did the Landmark Forum, right? I did the Landmark Forum, and then my brother-in-law was going to do the next one, and I'm going to come assist. And I mean, to this day, I talk about it in my book, but I remember the experience very clearly because I came in to help out and was quickly informed that's not such a thing. There is no such thing as helping out. We're there to cause the forum to happen. So, but there was not there was one meeting, I think, that we had ahead of time. We were asked to come to meet as a team. We would sort of create where we were standing and the outcome like that. But this sounds like it was much more intense, much more formal. Was that also happening
Yes.
simultaneously with the S training and forum at that time? That kind of
Well,
tension?
yes. The difference is, I mean, if you looked at structurally at the two programs,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of it looks the same. There's a logistics team. There's a team that's handling media, uh, films and speakers and all that stuff. But there's an awful lot in the 6 day that went that had no parallel in the S training or the forum. For example, I mentioned the ropes course. Every week we take the assistants plus a bunch of people who came in to assist just on ropes and one other process the night before. And we would put the lives of 100 participants in their hands. So that see where with the S training, as you said, you were focused on causing and what's your stand and all. No, we were focused on we had people's lives in our hands.
Yes. Okay.
Not only in the ropes course, but in what was called the breakthrough process. Every morning there was exercise and run, and you've got 100 people ranging from world class runners to fat middle aged people who are running not in a race except against themselves. The key thing in the run was to run beyond your limits, to push yourself farther than you think you can go.
Right.
So safety, physical safety, was a huge part of the training of the assistance training program.
I see. I see.
And we had professional staff, for example, some of the best people I've worked with ever in and out of Est and Landmark were the people who ran the 6 day. One of my closest friends, Ed Atkinson, was the manager of the West Coast 6 day. We did the 6 day in California and in New York. And Ed passed on a couple of years ago. He was even older than me. And, he was one of the most effective. I'm dedicated. I'm writing, as you know, I'm writing a book on transformation. It's dedicated to Ed
Oh, that's
because
nice.
I love him so much, but because he was, for me, a walking, living, breathing example of what it's like to live a transformed life.
Mm.
Um, and that's
So,
really what the 6 was about. And it was about integrity. I'll tell
well,
you
it's
one
interesting.
added.
You said the kind of the point of it, if you will, or the main thrust or thing you were tending to is going beyond your limits. So I'm assuming that
Right.
activities and exercises were sort of designed with that outcome in mind. So let's
That's right.
let's back up and tell us now what the 6 day actually looked like. So were some of
All right. So
those,
let me walk you through it.
yeah, beautiful.
You'd arrive on, I believe it was on Sunday. Could have been Saturday. No, it was Sunday. Midday. There'd be a classroom session. Sunday, and that was all about what's the course about, just what you'd expect on the first day of a program.
Yeah. Kind of
Um,
orientation, right?
right. Sunday night was the first major process of the program. And it was a process called, simply enough, stand up, sit down.
Okay.
And the purpose of it, Monday, Tuesday rather, these people are going to go out on the ropes course.
Mm.
From our point of view, their life depends on following instructions. If they didn't follow instructions, they could get seriously hurt. So the purpose of stand up, sit down, which was just what it sounds like, it was 2 or 3 hours of the trainer, the co-trainer in this case. I led it many times saying, stand up, thank you, sit down, thank you, stand up. And sure enough, and there were a few other things interspersed, touch your knee, move your hand. Simple instructions, and sure as hell somebody wouldn't follow it.
Uh-huh.
And then we'd have a look at what stopped you. What was the thought? What was the feeling? What was it that made it okay? You promised at the beginning, as we got an explicit promise from everybody to follow instructions. So it was training in integrity. It was training in following instructions, but also in looking at how you undermine your own ability to give your word.
Mm.
So anyhow, Monday, classroom sessions all day, run, exercise, classroom, meals, everybody, there were 3 meals a day. There was a whole kitchen staff.
So I think that's one of the big things to understand that's different here. This is a live-in program, right? You're all in a camp together, so to speak, right?
Yeah.
Versus the forum, what would become the forum and what was the S training, also different from each other, but was 3 days and evening, very long days. You didn't get to go home very long, but you did get to go home and sleep around. This is live-in, so we're all
here. You're there from Sunday to Saturday.
Gotcha. Okay. 6 days.
It was a 6-day program because Sunday and Saturday were half days. Mm-hmm. The day you arrived and the day you left, and then Monday through Friday were 5 days. So we called it the 6th day.
Okay.
That night, Monday night, we did what was called the breakthrough process. Now, somebody in one of the Facebook groups mentioned this about banging a table with a bat. Yeah. Which is, again, simple enough. That's exactly what it was. It was to go beyond your limits, to focus on someplace, what Jung would call a piece of shadow. I'm not good enough. Mm-hmm. My mother never loved me, whatever it is. Put that on the table and then with a foam bat, just pound until you broke through. Until you got to the point where you released. Now that's, by the way, straight out of bioenergetics. When I was trained in bioenergetics, I did a program at Esalen where I did that exact same exercise, except I had the facilitator physically pounding on my back while I was pounding on the table. We didn't do that at the same time.
My daughter, inside of her, she's done many different therapies and whatnot to address her complex trauma. And actually, one of the most effective ones was this really incredible trauma-specific retreat center up in Anchorage, Alaska, run by a very brilliant woman, Dr. Marianne. She wrote a book called Rapid Transformation Therapy, I think is her title. They really travel the world. She's psychologically trained. She's a social worker, therapist like that. She married, her husband is an Inuit, I believe Inuit. I apologize, Marianne, if I got that wrong, but medicine man. And what they really brought together as they were working with a lot of trauma victims is a lot of indigenous methods and traditional methods and some of these methods, right? So Marianne's about 10 years younger than you. So I've never asked her if she did the S training or whatnot, but I'd be shocked if she didn't. And, but they actually use somewhat similar methods, because
physical
it's physical.
Release has been used for,
exactly. Yeah.
thousands of years.
Right.
Anyhow, so the point of the breakthrough process was, first of all, again, to have people go beyond an emotion, see that they could go beyond what seemed like an insurmountable emotional barrier.
Okay.
Okay. It also teed them up for the next day, which was the ropes course.
Mm.
So it got them at a very high level of energy.
Okay.
The ropes course was an all-day event,
Now, wait,
consisted of three.
how is the sleep? So, one of the hallmarks of the S training and of the forum is the lack of, there's very little time to
Yeah,
sleep.
no, there was sufficient sleep.
What is
It
that?
wasn't. Well, it would depend. Some days go longer than others, but generally speaking, we look for 6-7 hours of sleep.
Okay, good.
So if we ended, and it was usually the co-lead that ended it, the day, if we ended at say midnight, we'd start the next day at 7, maybe even 8.
Mm.
Okay.
Okay.
But people, and sleeping was relatively comfortable. Depends on there were different sites. They were all beautiful. They were all, the one that got the most use was around Santa Rosa in California. It was an old camp that a union had built for its members for recreational purposes.
Yeah, I have a newspaper
So,
story about that site. There's a whole
yeah,
newspaper
there was
story
just
about the
recently some
bankruptcy and the
brouhaha,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. That's
But
actually
when
the
I did it on the
only.
East Coast,
What's
sorry.
interesting, Ed, is that story about that property and the Werner Erhard Associates or whatever entity was going to buy it, reneging and not buying it, and whatever all that
Right.
drama was that's in that news story. That is literally the only story I've really been able to find, or any of the other folks that are now deconstructing and looking at this. That's the only story we've been able to find about the 6 day, and
Well, that's because that was one of the first sites and was definitely the one we were at the longest. Originally in California, it was done at Warner Hot Springs down near San Diego. And it must have been in the early 80s because I remember going down to Warner Hot Springs when I was on staff. So it must have been in the early 80s that they leased the Santa Rosa site. And then that was it from then on the West Coast. On the East Coast, I did it in Massachusetts. That right? Yeah, that sounds right. Western Massachusetts, but then we got a site in the Catskills, near New Paltz, if you people know New York, and that was also a long-term site. That one we built,
okay.
but the cabins were comfortable. I can't remember if a married couple did it together, if they shared a cabin. Mostly there were men's cabins and women's cabins.
Gotcha.
I do know that when we did the 6 day for teens, we patrolled those cabins all night long because
Got it.
teenagers will be teenagers. But
But
in
you
any
can hear
case,
the kind of care that was taken for physical safety, particularly,
absolutely.
like that's a different thing. We'll circle back to that, but I just really can hear
Yeah,
that. So,
since you
so
asked,
then
let me run through the
yeah,
rest of the
breakthrough
programs. We'll finish
process. So,
it out.
yes.
So then next day, ropes course, 3
Okay.
events. Okay, one is a zip line, which everybody now is pretty familiar with. You go to stand on a cliff, there's a line running diagonally down to the ground. There's a trolley you hang on to. Now, people are wearing safety equipment like crazy. I mean, harnesses and belts and helmets and gloves. Um, and the zip line was the easiest,
Hmm.
physically easiest event because all you had to do was hold on. Now, a lot of people found holding on a challenge.
Yeah.
There were safety lines
Right. I remember
that,
my first zip line. It wasn't a 6 day, but it was in Costa Rica. But
yeah,
you're high. It's up there. It's
yeah,
scary.
you're high, and also the holding on part. Your arms and hands get pretty tired
Yeah.
if you're not, the tip-top shape. And so people would let go, and they'd be caught by the safety rope, and then they'd have to go through a whole process about like in the run or anyplace else. What happened? What had you? You gave your word to hang on. That was the last instructions you heard was don't let go.
Mm.
So how come you let go? And they got to see how reasonable they would be with themselves. That if, and how they had trusted a safety line And they were clear, by the way, that this was being run by professionals but staffed by amateurs. So they're trusting a safety line, and they got no reason to trust it. And the big question in 6A was always how do you live your life like that? How is that like your life?
Gotcha.
So anyhow, by this time it's Tuesday. Now remember, everybody's been there since Sunday. They've had several meals. The meals were okay, but they weren't great. They tended to be vegetarian. They were certainly nutritious. I wouldn't call them delicious, but after the ropes course, they got a chicken dinner.
Ooh.
And you ask anybody who's done that program or who assisted, because the assistants would get a chicken dinner that night too. And that was like the best chicken dinner you ever ate.
I'll bet. I'll bet.
Anyhow, but then the day's not over. So now ropes course, dinner. Then we go into, and somebody asked about this on the Facebook group as well, sex withholds.
Yeah, what's the porn movies, right? That was the question that Jerry asked. It was great.
There were.
So did they really show porn
giving
movies?
Way too much credit to call them porn.
Really?
They were from like 1940s stag parties.
Okay.
But they were films of sex in all its forms. And I mean all its forms. And I mean different species and interspecies. And the purpose of that was to get people engaged with the idea that we're here to talk about sex and there's no holds barred. And then people would start sharing. First, we did it in a group. If you've had an extramarital affair, stand up. Well, let me come back to that one. If you've masturbated, stand up. If you masturbate more than 3 times a week, stand up.
Oh, wow. So it's kind of
Notice that you're not alone. It was I don't think I ever saw a time in sex withholds, no matter how outrageous the prompts got, where only one person stood up. So people got to see, wait a minute, maybe I'm normal. Maybe I'm okay. Maybe I'm not. This thing I've been hiding and keeping secret about myself. And then we would get to some of the hard stuff. If you've had an extramarital affair, stand up. And a couple stands up, a married couple. Or he stands up and she doesn't. No comment on any of this, no judgment, no nothing, no applause, no nothing. Just there it is, sit down, next question. Until we ran through all the questions, and then it was time for people, if they wanted to, no coercion, to stand up and go public. And that's where married couples who did the course together would sometimes find out more than they knew about their partner. And there was stuff to process, a lot of stuff to process out of that. So that's Tuesday. That was an exhausting day. Wednesday, the big deal was body confronts. If you did the S training, there was a process on the first weekend, Saturday night, called the fear process. And what would happen was rows of people would come and stand in front of the room, and assistants would come in and stand in front of them, very close in front of them, just staring in their eyes. And people got to see how uncomfortable it was to just be with another human being, and how much fear it brought up and how much anger it brought up. Well, this took it, in the 6th day, we took it to the next level. Everybody was wearing bathing suits.
As one of my questions is the story about the bathing suits.
Absolutely.
Right. So in the version of that,
wearing bathing
makes
suits
it forward, but yeah, not
would come in, and they wouldn't just stand and stare at you. They would stare at your body from, we used to say, asshole to appetite.
So does everybody have a bathing suit, or the assistants?
Everybody.
Only? Everybody. So everybody's
trainers had on a bathing suit.
Okay.
Assistants and the confront team had on a bathing suit, and you got to see. And again, this is all followed by processing and sharing. You got to see where you were ashamed of your body, where you were afraid of your body, where you thought your body was ugly and nobody else thinks so. All that. So we're really like, again, going as deep as possible. So that's Wednesday. Frankly, I don't remember what the hell we did on Thursday. Oh, I did. Oh, yes, of course, the samurai game.
That was another
Thursday,
question.
samurai game was something that we bought, Werner bought, licensed from George Leonard at the Danger Process Done was in the training. That's right. In the 6th day, it was called Body Confronts.
Right.
Later, it came to be called, people would refer to it as the Fear Process, but you're right. The name of it was the Danger Process.
Right.
So, Samurai Game was mainly about leadership and teamwork, and what it was two armies, and then there'd be exercises, and whoever was left standing at the end won the game. But that's not what the game was about. When you process the game, it was about if you were what's called a daimyo, which was the leader of one of the two teams, it was about leadership. If you were somebody who got killed in the battles, then you laid on the floor while the battle continued around you.
Yeah.
And
James Arthur Ray would later. James Arthur Ray, who was actually the man who was responsible for the death of Kirby Brown, the founders of Seek Safely, he had a version of the samurai process that he didn't claim it from Est. I don't know whether he ever did Est or the Forum. Again, I would be surprised if he hadn't. But anyway, that would be one of the ones that would go on and get misused, actually. And I mean, a lot of these did, right?
It had a lot of potential for misuse and a lot of potential for physical. I mean, when we did it, we were like throwing ping pong balls at each other or hacky sacks or something like that. But if you wanted to, arm people with something a little more damaging.
Well, the way he did it, I don't remember the exact whole story, but it was more psychologically, and he was the only one killing people. So, right? And so, and then you would end up, in fact, it's in their book, The Sweet Life, Kirby's part of the story is like she died, you would die, and then you'd have to stay on the floor exactly where you were without getting up, sometimes for 6, 7, 8 hours. People would pee their pants. People would
wasn't that long,
traumatize. It actually created trauma.
I'll tell you one funny samurai game story. There was the only Japanese trainer whose name was Nami Kamanami, and she was a medical doctor, I believe. I think she was an OBGYN, I don't remember, who became a trainer, brought the training to Japan, later ran the Japan organization for Werner. And Nami's passed on now, but when she led the 6th day, and I led it with her, that particular 6th day, we had her lead it because a whole contingent from Japan, it was a Japanese 6th day, basically. She led it mostly in Japanese. I don't remember if there were any non-Japanese in there or not. But when it came to the samurai game, you got to imagine now, a samurai game, if you're Japanese, is a different game to
That's
begin
right.
with.
Yeah.
But if you speak Japanese or you know about Japanese, women speak Japanese differently than men do. They use different tonality, they use different accents, they use even different words. And it's characterized even by Japanese as a submissive way of speaking. So Nami, who had been leading the course all week, knew these people. They knew her. They get to the samurai game, and she, sets it all up, and she starts, giving the commands in Japanese, and nobody's listening to her. So she stopped, realized what was going on, shifted into male tonality, etc., and the game went like that. Turned it around instantly, and it was one of the deepest samurai games we ever did. Anyhow,
so what was the point again? I think you might have said at the beginning, but let's circle back to it. What was the intention of the samurai game in terms of the design?
Oh, there was a bunch of stuff. I was never, to be perfectly frank with you, I was never quite that clear that it really fit well.
Hmm.
but it was integrity for sure. All through the 6 days, integrity. You gave
Yeah,
your
I can
word.
hear it. Yeah.
So if you got up when you were dead, or if you didn't die when you were hit, or like that. So that'd be one. Confronting your death was really the point. That was George's point. George Leonard's
Hmm.
point for the game
Okay.
is confronting the samurai motto belittles it. I don't want to say motto, but saying to
Sure.
die before you go into battle,
Hmm.
and to confront what that means. And people would see they were so focused on winning, they'd be killed instantly. It was not, the selection of the leader for each side was easily dominated by people who really, really, whose ego was all about being the leader.
Yeah.
And then they'd be the first person killed.
This sounds like Survivor. Have you ever watched the TV show
Well,
Survivor?
I haven't.
I
I
watched
pride
it.
my. I know a few people who pride myself on never having watched a reality show other than The Apprentice,
Very. Oh God.
and that wasn't reality.
It's not a good one to start with. So, but that's interesting because it sounds like a version of Survivor, done in a one day.
It
Okay,
is.
so the
Yeah,
samurai game happens. We've done the danger / fear process. We've done the bathing
we're
suits.
pretty
We've
near
done.
done at this point.
Okay, so we
Friday.
do.
Friday is about. Friday was the culmination of the program. The confront on Friday was, can you take the stand that this is it and I'm satisfied?
Mm,
Now, when I did the program, my mind just went nuts at that. But if I do that, I'll never accomplish anything again. I'll never do anything again.
hmm.
If I'm satisfied, I'll be. No, it's not about being complacent. It's not about anything except confronting reality, that this is it. This is the only reality we got.
Yeah. I can hear Werner used to say this thing to me. And I mean, he said it to lots of people, but personally, he would say this to me from time to time. He'd go, I don't have three arms, which was his shorthand version of this. The two arms is it, like
Yeah.
that's it. I got two arms. I wish I had three. I could get more done, whatever, but I got two. And
Right.
anyway, to
But
me, that
then
was
the
always what he was
challenge is,
communicating.
and I'm satisfied.
Yeah.
So that was Friday. And
Hmm.
that was, I mean, you think getting it in the training or in the forum was tough. Of people holding out and refusing and arguing and, bringing in everybody from God to Martin Heidegger uh, to justify that this can't be it.
Yeah.
There's got to be something better.
Mm.
Or if I accept that this is it, terrible things are, or whatever.
Yeah.
But that was the culmination of then Saturday morning was the usual kind of, saying goodbye and all that. Here's the unique thing about it. Of all the programs, and I participated in most of the programs in Landmark and in Est, not in the wisdom part. I just hung out with Brian. I figured I'd get wise enough. But
It's a good place to start.
in all the programs, this is the only one that had no bring guests, no register for the next program,
Mm.
no. Assisting was there as an opportunity and a privilege that you paid for to be in the assistance. I think you paid to be in the assistance training program.
That was
I
one of
don't
my
remember.
questions. If you paid for it, yeah. With the
I think
structure.
there was nominal if there was, but you did a lot of work. You worked your ass off before and after, not just the physical work of whatever you're doing in the kitchen or wherever, but the work of the program itself with lots of meetings while the participants are in the course room and the assistants are having their own meetings.
Mm.
So it was unique in that way for me. That later, in about 85, 6, literally by popular demand, we created, Ron Bynum, Hal Eisen, and I created a follow-on program for graduates of the 6 day because they kept coming to us wanting to know what's next. So we created a program called Mastery of Empowerment, which never achieved the legendary status that the 6 day did, but it was a good program. It was a
Hmm.
good. I have a lot of fond memories of Mastery of Empowerment, including there was a run in that program too, but it wasn't about going beyond. It was just a run that was there to make sure people got exercise. And we did the program in Florida near Naples. And on the run, there's this big old gator.
Ooh,
Called him Grandpa Gator,
yeah,
just sitting in the water, watching us run by. And I don't know if he thought it was a cafeteria or what, but that's just a random memory.
that's funny. Well, it's interesting because I can hear, I never knew of the 6 day other than is this kind of infamous lore, and
By the way,
but
excuse me for interrupting you. I,
yeah,
I don't want to forget to say this.
yeah.
There is a film called, somebody who's on the call will know this, help me out. Um, I used to be different, now I'm the same.
And it's a
It's a film of the 6 day, done at the 6 day, one of the ones that Werner came to. And Don, I'm glad you're here. You're keeping me honest. Uh, anyhow, and it's John Denver is the soundtrack on the
I
road
wonder
of
if
experience.
it's still out there. I can't Google while I'm looking,
It's
but I'll look it up.
hard to find, but if you search for it, I used to be different, now I'm the same, or search for 6 day film. If I can find a link to it, which I'm pretty sure I have somewhere, I'll put it in the
We'll put it in the show notes if we can find it.
uh, book club
Gotcha. Oh, Eric says he
site.
can't find it online, but I know, I love we're looking. But that's really, so here's the thing that I find somewhat fascinating. And as I've been deconstructing my own experience, but more the world of what I kind of put in the bucket called human potential, which I consider landmark Werner, that whole thing to be a leader in that, to be not just a significant player, but actually a kind of a breakthrough leader. Like so many people, copied it, as it were. And to a certain degree, they copied, it's all, different ideas and processes and things. And one guru or leader will take it from another and then add their twist and their this and that. I mean, that's the way personal growth and development works. What's interesting, Ed, is so fast forward, into 2016, and I take on a partnership, a collaboration with who I call Yoga Man, and just talk about him a little bit in my book. And I would say I had heard from him that he designed a lot of his teacher trainings. In part, he had hired and worked with Landon Carter in his early iterations, right? I came in
Hmm.
many years later, 10, 15 years later. And one of the things that I was sort of working with him a lot was, and I can hear he had a lot of these elements in his training. Now he's doing yoga. He's actually a brilliant yoga teacher, and it was raised on yoga. And as his parents were part of who brought yoga to the United States, literally, and San Francisco at the same time all this is going on. And but they're working in yoga, but he brought in this element of, be at the edge of your mat, push yourself beyond your boundaries. It's power yoga. And his father was really the inventor of power yoga, brought that into being. And so I can hear the elements, not only in that, but in, there are ropes courses going on today, and in various ways. So that's really interesting, as we walk through that. A couple of questions I wrote down as we went. So you talked about the physical training and the emphasis on this really clearing people for training the assistants to keep people physically safe. I'm curious about what went into the mental health. Now, not recognizing that this is 1971, 1984, how we thought about mental health in 1971, 1984 is quite different than today. So, but how is that? How did they account for that?
Great question. First of all, and you've heard me talk about this with respect to the training. Um, we had a screening process
Mm.
where if anything, any red flags showed up in the forms that people had to fill out, and they had to fill out an application to be in the program and a medical form and get a physical and have it certified by their doctor. Now, almost nothing would keep them out.
Yeah.
But for example, if they had a heart condition, we wouldn't let them run.
Yeah, one of our earlier in our group in book club, right, which is a Facebook group, Ed's in it, and we were talking with folks this week. That's kind of what ran up to this. I was like, hey, let's jump on and talk about it. Rigorous health screening. I remember having to get a physical, including an EKG. I don't remember
Right.
what mental health screening was exactly, but I'm sure there was some, including standard stuff about not being appropriate for people on psych meds and so on, but not necessarily. I mean, there was some
Well,
of that in that
we
area.
gave them those disclaimers. We
Mhm.
asked the question, which I don't even think it's legal to ask today. Are you in therapy, and do you have does your therapist know and understand? We were available to talk to therapists if they didn't understand and tell them exactly what was involved. And if a doctor or therapist said, don't do it, that was it. We were done.
Okay.
Now, once we were on site, we had an MD on site for every program. He was part of the assistance training program,
Yeah.
a different one each week, but always a physician there.
Did folks have to sign a release?
Oh, yeah. Oh, hell yes.
We have it
It was more than a release. It was informed consent. In other words, they were told exactly what they were going to be asked to do.
Gotcha. Isn't that
Um,
interesting how some of that stuff went so missing, especially not all of it, not all of it. And
no,
I think you mentioned one thing that's, I think, important for us to be honest about. It's not like, Landmark as it lives today is not out to hurt people. They do have a form that warns people of these kind of conditions and has recommendations and so on.
yeah.
But it's interesting the
Don's
integrity
right.
with
One of the
which.
therapy questions was, "Are you winning in therapy?"
Oh, gotcha. Wow. That's great. Well,
I got to find out who Don is. He and I'm sure he and I, probably Scott and I, must know each other from what they're saying.
yeah, there's another Ed in the chat too. So but I think that's really worth noting. So, I just started this workshop called Safe Practitioner Workshop. What does it actually really look like to be responsible for the spiritual, emotional, mental safety of our customers? And
Yeah,
one of the principles what is that we brought forth, we meaning me and the folks at See Safely, is if you're having folks sign a release, if you're informing them about the dangers and you're having them sign a release, which is the integrous way to do that, you also have the support for whatever risk you're asking them to take. So we use the example of the Boston Marathon. You do the Boston Marathon, but there are medical tents and ambulances every so what on. And
right,
I host events. Many events actually do require that you either have, in some, you require you have an ambulance on site if you're doing any kind of physical thing, or that you have a plan. So if you're working with a reputable, good retreat center, those are the kinds of things they're going to be asking
right.
you ahead of
Yeah,
time. And
and we
that's
had
what's
all of
gone
that. We
missing,
didn't
though.
have an ambulance on site, but
Yeah,
we had a car ready to go, and we were no
you had a
site, no
plan.
6 day site was ever more than half half an hour from an ambulance, and we had EpiPens. We had everything. The truth,
But what's
the
more
thing that's
important
remarkable
here,
about it,
what's really important here, I think, folks are listening, because a big part of the reason I'm confronting the line between the light side and the dark side is, well, what have we lost? What have we forgotten? What does it take? What does it look like to make personal development and wellness services safer and more ethical?
right,
And I do
right,
think there are some answers in our past, because I think you're pointing very well to it. There was a lot of procedures and things that were there that were the safety of the participants was paramount, and there were measures taken, right?
so,
Yeah, so that's
and in
really
the
great.
in the years that we did the 6 day,
Hmm.
there were injuries. There were even serious injuries, both to participants and assistants. One person died
Really?
on the zip line, and it was determined after exhaustive, autopsies and the whole deal, that had nothing to do with. This is a guy who had a heart condition. He was cleared to do it. And,
It got
you know,
through, yeah.
Everybody comes with an expiration date. He happened to hit his in the 6th day.
Gotcha.
But the safety record of that program, when I do safety, when I consult to mining companies and chemical companies about safety, which I've done a lot, I use that as an example because there was only one acceptable outcome with regard to safety, and that was 0 incidents.
Mm.
And we had courses where there were 0 incidents. But in the courses where there were incidents, even as minor as a nicked finger,
Mm-hmm.
there was a careful debrief about what was missed, what was left out, what was ignored, what was stepped over.
Mm.
I think it was the 6th day where that whole expression about stepping over the trash came from.
From Werner?
Because
That's
because
where
we
it
would clean the site between courses,
Mm-hmm.
and nothing got stepped over. Those sites were immaculate.
Mm.
So it really, we were kidding around earlier. I don't think we were on recording yet, but we were talking about the 6 days legendary.
Yeah.
It really is. It really is. It's another old S training expression, the silver box. You take some experience you've had and you put it in a silver box and you keep it carefully and nothing will ever measure up to that again. Well, the 6 days kind of in that category for a lot of people.
I would say that's definitely how people talk about it. For
Yeah,
those of us
a
that
friend of mine in
came in
Israel,
that
I kid him. I tell him he's never gotten over the 6 day because he still quotes it, 20 years, 30 years later.
Well, and from what we're learning now, in neuroscience and particularly the whole, as we're learning more and more about the whole trauma experience and the recovery from trauma experience and so on, the body, bringing in that embodied piece. Right now, the way the work exists inside of Landmark, it's all mental. It's all mental.
Mm-hmm.
In the wisdom area, we did a little bit. We would go into what we called the immediate, which was the expression of emotion. Physical, structural language, but still we were talking about it. We did some processes and exercises, but for the most part, it's all a mental talking course. You can hear this had those other elements. It had the body and emotional elements. So in terms of, just to circle back to the mental health thing, would you say, looking back now, though, were there occurrences of mental health breakdowns?
Oh, 100%.
And how were those
Absolutely. I
handled?
handled some of them myself.
Mm-hmm.
Particularly, but not only, around sex withholds. And by the way, Eric pointed out to me it's useful to mention that all of that I've talked about was the same in the teen 6 day, except for the sex films.
Mm-hmm.
Sex withholds still went on, just without the films. Amy says, "Why was it so remarkable? Did people show her?"
Show or
Okay,
express
what
that
I
they
was
had
talking about, Amy, was the safety record. Did people show or express? I certainly had a transformational experience. Now, here's the problem with transformation, as we've said before on these calls. Transformation is a practice, not an event.
Right.
So people went home and they had a peak experience. But if they didn't put it into practice, and I'm not talking about sharing and bringing guests or any of that bullshit. I'm talking about actually practicing, living authentically, living with integrity, talking straight responsibly, being accountable, all that stuff. If you don't practice it, it goes away. The music in the supermarket takes over and you shop in rhythm to it, whether you realize it or not. Unless you're conscious of the fact that you can set your own rhythm. I think I strayed there someplace, Ann.
No, that's okay. The other part of Amy's question, which points to kind of an ongoing thing we've been looking at, which is there follow-up to determine the efficacy? And I'll tell you, we have searched high and low, still searching, still working with world researchers to find studies. We've found basically that the Erhard organization, in whichever iteration, made a few toss-outs towards a longer-term study being
Yeah, but
part of
they
a.
were invalid. They were in-house. They were biased.
They were
No,
yeah, no. Yeah,
there have not been, to my knowledge, any peer reviewable stuff that would get published by the American Psychological Association or someplace like
no.
that. Studies. No. Um,
There's some that have been done that included as training. Dr. John Hunter, who's his PhD program is based on this, and he's found some
yeah.
that have elements and aspects. But no, Amy, that's one of the problems with the human potential, personal development, self help is there's very, 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 very little, like even less than women on Ambien kind of got studies. No, and the few that have been done have shown that the peak experience lasts a short time, 7 to 10 days. What I think those studies don't account for that I would address in my own personal experience is if I have a peak experience and I have an insight, let's say, let's use normal language, right? If I have some insight, I see something, oh my gosh, I've been really doing it this way. I actually had an insight this last week. As I haven't had a W-2 or a job that provides a regular monthly income since 2019. And, and I've been really struggling with that. And then how my husband and I have subsisted is we're real estate developers. So we moved from real estate to real estate. So literally had an insight the other day, like, oh, wait, if I actually related to myself and thought of myself as a real estate developer, I wouldn't be freaked out about not having a W-2 paycheck. Now that's an insight in that moment. And I've had a lot of peace since that insight a couple of weeks ago. Now we'll see 3 months, 4 months from now, the anxiety will come back and then I'll go, oh gosh, oh, I remember now I'm a real estate developer.
Yeah.
Right?
See, that's important. And what you just said,
yeah.
Peak experiences, as far as I'm concerned, are useless by themselves. But an awareness like you had, put into a context that what you're after is correction, not perfection. So that down the line, you let's say you had that awareness 2 weeks after you had an anxiety attack. Next time you'll have an anxiety attack and it'll be 10 days. And the time after that, it'll be a week. And the time after that, it'll be 3 days.
Mm-hmm.
Awareness proceeds retrograde to the point where you have the awareness simultaneously with the experience. And at that point, you have a choice. Viktor Frankl said between stimulus and response, there's a space, and in that space lies our power to choose.
Mm.
Transformation as a practice over time in community is about creating that space and reclaiming your power to choose.
Yeah.
So in the 6th day, we would celebrate the person who came in first in the run, and we would celebrate the person who came in last. And the question for both of them would be the same. What did you realize? What did you see about yourself? Mm-hmm. Not, why didn't you run faster for the person who was last?
Yeah. The other place. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, you go.
Well, because there's one thing I would also add to, as I've been really looking at this over the last several years, but intensely since my book came out, and so many people are coming forward and we're talking about it. We have the show and we're talking about it. The other place where I think we took a left turn is when we tried to turn, and where we tried to turn. And I say we because I include myself. I've been a part of this industry for most of my adult life. But we try to turn transformation into a product. That's a problem. That's a problem because I can provide an opportunity in which somebody could have an insight, could have a breakthrough. If I kind of am now allergic to even calling it transformation because I've seen that so abused in the commodification of it, is false promises and whatnot. And we've seen this in a number of culty groups, that this is one of the left turns that happens. As soon as we start trying to promise as a facilitator, as a leader, as an organization, as soon as we start to promise results like transformation, you're going to have a transformation. Your relationships are going to work. That is not mine to promise because it's not mine to
Yeah,
make.
you know what's the most important word in that sentence? You're going to have a transformation.
Yeah. No,
You know what
what's
it is? Ah,
say more.
you're going to have a
Oh,
transformation.
right.
A, because transformation is not an event,
Right. But to
and you don't
commodify
have it.
it,
You can't hold it. It's like it takes practice. It takes time. It takes community. And one of the things, see, Landmark and Est before it reduced community to bring guests
right.
rather than go home, go home and practice.
Yeah.
Now, and Scott, I'm not going to disillusion you and talk about the pictures. The difference was amazing, and that was not an accident.
You did before and after, but because somebody asked that in the question, what was the thing about filming, and you didn't mention that when you walked through it.
Yeah,
But
when
there was
you
something
arrived
about
on site, you got a picture taken. And the last thing you did, one of the last things you did on the last day was you got another picture taken.
it's brilliant.
Let me just say the lighting in the two pictures was not identical.
I see.
And people did look different. They were, well, for one thing, I forgot this part. I forgot to mention this. There was a night, I think it was Thursday night. Yes, it was Thursday night when we brought in barbers and beauticians. No one was forced to, but anybody who wanted to could get their hair cut, their beard shaved, etc. And one of the things a lot of people, I found out that I was hiding behind a full beard.
Well, Ed, I think you're speaking. You keep pointing to something that I think is really integral to these kinds of programs, right? Landmarks and all the others, concepts. You're in a container with a primed inquiry, as it were, with a primed background. Like you're there. If any of us walked through our daily life with the kind of looking that you're primed to look through with one of these courses, you would be having transformations day in and day out. And some of us do, with the gratitude practice that's so popular these days is a lot about that. It's a gentle way to say, hey, wow, recognize those miracles, those daily miracles in your life. Well, then pretty soon you're living in an experience of the miraculous. These are common understandings that we have now.
Yeah. Yeah.
But hang on, I keep taking notes so that I'll remember to ask these questions. And I love that correction, not perfection. We're going to make a meme out of that, Ed. That's really good. Let me look at my question.
It's also, by the way, the corollary to that is it's not that the faster you correct, the farther along in your practice you are.
Yeah. Which you can see from what you were saying, that the distance, what did you say, between stimulus and response? I mean, all of this is a constructed, guided way to, work with the human psyche. And,
Yep.
I think that's a good thing. And, what we're committed to here at Confronting the Line is looking at all of it, the good, the bad, and the ugly, right? Like, so that we can learn as we move forward. And it is really interesting what got dropped out, because as I listen to you tell this, I'm like, man, there's so many. I can hear the hallmarks from when I came in. We do well-being checks very rigorously in all of the programs. But it's the push and drive for the result overrides everything. And then the other thing is it's interesting. You keep mentioning that everything kept coming to integrity, which I would say is the primary control mechanism for sure in the Landmark programs I can speak to, because that's where my direct experience is. But, that's all the stuff about going to the bathroom, coming back on time. I mean, you have even today, I would venture to say that there are forums that spend a significant amount of time, or more likely an advanced course. They don't get into it too deep till the advanced course. In the advanced course, forum is about your personal integrity. Advanced course is about integrity. So if one person's late, there's generally at least one session where the whole session ends up being about who are you as a group that you would let one person be late, blah, 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 blah. And all of that is to, bring about the idea of actually being people who do what they say and say what they do. Again, not
and it's
a bad
so
idea.
easy to turn that into a manipulation.
Exactly.
See, integrity, I always go back, the original definition of responsibility was the willingness to be cause in the matter without blame, shame, credit, or guilt. The minute you use integrity, one of the smartest things Werner ever said, and I don't know if it's original with him or not, track record says probably not, was that if you believe the truth, you make it a lie. Once you believe it,
Mm-hmm.
integrity is a fundamental bedrock principle of humanity. Integrity, authenticity, commitment, vision, all those things. But the minute you use them, and of course, I'll never forget that one of the first trainings I ever assisted in, the logistics supervisor, who happened to be my dentist, picked me up. Or I picked him up, rather, and I was 5 minutes late. And the first thing he said when he got in the car, so is this going to be the 5 minutes late training? It's like, come on. You're right. I'm late. I acknowledge that. Okay. At the same time, that's like children are starving in Armenia.
Margie Parrott, one of my dearest mentors as a wisdom course leader, used to say that basically what we delivered in Landmark was power tools, tools in language for power, right? So she called them power tools. But mostly we came out of the programs 3-year-olds with power tools. And that's where the wisdom course picked up, right?
I love Margie, and that's really smart.
Yeah, she's
that's absolutely right.
She's watching.
Don says, considering the choice to license the samurai game, were there other technologies or techniques that deserved a similar license? Or definitely the second part, Don, an acknowledgement of
Well, go back and tell us about licensing the samurai game. So because that's not something that we all.
I don't remember. Werner used to say he bought it. I don't remember what the deal was with George. Okay, whether it was licensed or bought, he at least acknowledged George. Even in the 6th day, we acknowledged that the samurai game was invented by George Leonard.
Mm.
I have gone through the exercise, Don, of looking at every quote-unquote distinction in the forum and where it came from. It says in Ecclesiastes in the Bible, there's nothing new under the sun. That's true. Whether it should have been licensed, I really think it should have been acknowledged. The only acknowledgement I ever saw was if a quote got used, usually the source of the quote was acknowledged. When I consulted in Europe to Dale Carnegie in Europe, I would start to do an exercise and the room would go funny. And I'd say, "We stole that one from you, right?" And they'd say, "Uh-huh." So, there's stuff that was in the training, at least, from Dale Carnegie, from Scientology, from mind dynamics, from Silva mind control, from what Aldous Huxley called it, the perennial philosophy. It's been around as long as there have been people around.
Right.
It's the recognition that as human beings, we suffer from an illusion of separateness. Einstein said it very well, and I don't have the quote in front of me, and that our life, if we wake up at all, millions of people never do, but if we wake up at all, we start to see that there is something else. There's a whole other realm. There's a whole other form of humanity that's intentional and choiceful and powerful and not transactional. There's a
It's an
book, a
important
very little
piece.
tiny book called Finite and Infinite Games by a man called James Carse,
Oh my gosh,
C-A-R-S-E.
I have that up on my shelf. I haven't ever
It's
been able
my
to get all the
Bible.
way through it. It is, but bring your
Oh,
dictionary.
you have to get all the way through it. He's his other stuff is brilliant, but this is his master work. He's a
Okay.
theologian, and basically what he says is we make the mistake of thinking that life is a finite game. A finite game is for example, a game of baseball. Game one of the World Series, Yankees and the Dodgers. There's going to be a score. Someone's going to win. Someone's going to lose. Then there's a finite game called the World Series. There's 7 games, up to 7 games. Someone's going to win. Someone's going to. Then there's baseball. Baseball is an infinite game. There's no transaction in it. It's what in landmark we would call the space or the clearing for the finite game.
Hmm.
Well, life is an infinite game, at least until you hit your expiration date.
Yeah.
Well, I happen to believe it goes beyond that, but that's you pays your money, you takes your chances. We won't know till we get there.
Yeah.
But life is an infinite game, and we play it like it's finite. Oh, I've got to get that paycheck. Oh, I've got to, please my boss. And then, it reduces, it shrinks. My friend Loretta Melandro talks about in business about shrinking the game down to something we can feel superior to, rather than
Right.
allowing ourselves to be overwhelmed by the immensity of the possibility that life is in front of us.
Well, the human brain, right, for safety is constantly interpreting everything from certain, uncertain, which translates safe, unsafe, known, unknown, safe, unsafe.
Binary is
It's,
binarism is the original illusion,
yeah,
and the original binarism is me, not me.
hmm,
I'm over here, and everything
you're over
that's
there.
not over here is not me, and I've got to transact with it. I go into
Yeah.
this in detail in my book.
Yeah.
Got to get in
One
one shameless plug in every podcast.
you have all the shameless plugs. I was going to say one of the other things, because you've been honored to read a draft of the book, is one of the things I really appreciate about it is you do go into, I don't want to use the word the source, because we got all kinds of problems with that, but
Yeah,
the
that one's kind
whole,
of been taken away from us.
yeah, exactly. And we'll reclaim it someday. But while we're deconstructing, we're going to stay away from it. But you do go in and say, no, 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 these ideas, this started here, or came from that, at least in our modern times, right? At least in some way before that. But one thing I do want to touch on that I think we've come to understand a little bit differently that is important if we want to evolve this space, which is our understanding of coercion. So, because you've said this term a couple of times, there was no coercion, there was informed consent. So, one of the things we've begun to see that is an integral aspect that creates coercion that we have been neglectful of or not understanding of, which is group dynamic. So, if I'm in a
Hmm.
group of 100 people and 90 of them are doing something, I'm the chances of me doing it, no matter my values, no matter what I think, no matter is like darn near 100%. There's actually an absolutely fabulous movie, which of course I can't think of the name of. It's a documentary that's out, and it set out to ask this question about what happened to the soldiers, the early German soldiers that were given the task to take Jews out into the woods and shoot them, which was one of the very, very first, before the camps, before the very, very early part of the war. They were rounding up Jewish people and they were taking them in the woods and shooting them. And there was a contingent of soldiers that tried to. This movie sets out to ask, why did these people that were normal people, they were cab drivers, they were husbands, they were brothers, these were good people as we would know them in our society, who went on to do atrocious acts. And how did that happen? And what happened to the ones that didn't? And when I watched this series, it got into this aspect of coercion that I think we're pretty naive about, which is this our ability, and this to me goes a little bit to that we're not really separated, we're interdependent. Our ability to stand out, to stand away from the crowd is very, very limited. And we're coming to see as practitioners or as facilitators that that's an aspect for us to be responsible for. When I do my goddess programs now, we do this belly dancing thing, Ed, and you're invited. You can show your belly or not show your belly. And this is a big thing for a bunch of 50, 60-year-old
I'm
women.
invited.
No, you are not. So
I just wanted to be clear.
but it was, when I started to see this, I was like, wow. And we always had a thing. You don't have to participate. There's none of any of the activities we do there that you have to participate in. But I saw I really needed to go a step further and say, no, 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 I really mean it. You don't have, and you're welcome. You can not participate at all. You can go take a walk. You can do whatever. You can sit and watch. Maybe you want to watch and that's what's comfortable for you. Maybe you want to do it, but you don't want to show your belly. Maybe you don't want to use the clangy bangy hip scarves. You really can participate in this movement. It's a movement class that we teach. It's just fun any way you want. And it's on me as the facilitator to really sort of mitigate almost against the coercion of the group if I'm going to truly create a safe and brave environment. And I think that's because we began to understand that pull.
Function of leadership. Leadership in any group, LGAT or your goddess group or whatever, the function of leadership is to make it safe.
Yeah.
That's the only job leaders have, including corporately. I had this conversation today with a corporate executive who's got a problem with, he's got team members who are disruptive and resistant. And I said, look, you haven't made it safe.
Yeah.
Something Werner said that I think was original with him, at least I've never found it anywhere else, was if people can't disagree with dignity, they become rebellious.
That's a good one.
And I've never found that not to be true.
Yeah.
So, people who think that leadership means suppressing dissent, find out that leads to rebellion faster than almost anything.
Or I think the more common way people think of leadership is getting people to do what you want them to do, getting them to march in the same direction or to move a certain way. So it's my ability, functionally what I'm saying, it's my ability to manipulate people. That is an aspect of how we have thought about leadership that is ready to be retired. It's just ready to be retired. We don't even have to make it wrong, but we can retire it. And, and I can hear that as you share about the 6 day.
You reminded me, Anne, of something else about the 6 day that I don't think I had seen before this conversation. Because there was a lot of emphasis on following instructions.
Yeah.
But we always got people, not only was there consent to the whole program, but before stand up, sit down, we're going to do a process that's arduous. It's going to require you to follow instructions. Are you willing to follow instructions? Do you promise to follow instructions? But then when people didn't, because it was a setup, you can't.
Somebody's going to not follow the instruction, right?
Right.
Yeah.
There was no shame. It was what is there to learn from this?
Yeah.
There was no blame. There was no shame. Somebody pointed out, Ellie and other people pointed out that the rule on the run was run 100% or stop, no walking. But if somebody stopped, they didn't get shamed, they got cheered.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Wow. Well, Ed, this has been really great. Are there I'm looking at the list of questions that people share with us ahead of time and the ones that I think we've gotten onto. I'll just give a minute. Is there any questions that any of our live audience wanted to ask or points that you wanted to touch on or things that you want to say now? Please put them in. And while folks are doing that, I just want to, throw the ball to you, Ed. Is there anything else that you want to share with us about this whole process? It's been really interesting. I
want to say
appreciate it.
thank you to the people that showed up on very short notice. Ann and I didn't decide to do this until yesterday or today.
Yeah.
I want to say a special thank you to my son, Eric, who I really, it makes a big difference to me that he's here. Eric is what he calls an est baby. And one of these times we're going to get him and some other people on to talk about what it was like to grow up as a trainer's kids. And by the way, I do not look good in that conversation. um, but he and I have
proven yourself to be a very big man, and in literally in every way, and particularly as a leader, because
thanks. Well,
you're not
Eric
unwilling.
was who shared your book with me, and originally he said, "Well, I read this book. You should look at it," and that started my relationship with you and the folks on the call, and it started a conversation between me and him that's really been amazing in our relationship. And he's an amazing guy, as are all my kids. But he's
That's
an amazing.
wonderful.
He's the only one of my kids who's an amazing guy.
They must have
The
daughters.
rest are all female. No, thank you, Ann. A
Awesome.
great conversation. I love
you.
doing this with you, and we,
It's
as much as
fun.
we can.
I
When you
think
get
it's
sick of having me, I'm available.
it's so important. I mean, if we want to build something in the future, we want to take from the past. We do want to learn from the past, all of it, not just the fun stuff, but all of it. So this was a chance to play in some of the fun stuff. Thank you.
I want to address one thing that I can't remember. I think it was Amy asked on the site today. It's not about whether the 6 day was a cult. It's not, for me, these conversations are not even about, I mean, Ann's title of her book is very provocative. And I had an hour conversation with my publisher yesterday about titles and covers for my book. And I appreciate that. I appreciate that it gets people to read it. But look, Landmark asked the 6 day, they were what they were. They're probably past their expiration date at this point, and like dinosaurs, it takes a while for them
And
to
they've
lie
taken
down.
some left turns. I mean, my point
Yeah.
in writing my book was to say, alert, 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 left
Yeah,
turn. And I've
exactly.
learned since the book came out that left turn was a lot harder and a lot longer ago than I thought. But, it's an authentic question. And,
Yeah, and as far as Werner personally, he's a human being. He's flawed.
mhm.
He's certainly not who people made him out to be. Um, so if it weren't, I wouldn't have my wife and my family that I have. I wouldn't have the life that I have. I wouldn't have written the book I wrote without having done these things. I don't know. Maybe I would have, but I didn't. So
It's kind of a moot
for me,
question, right? People always ask me, do you have regrets? And I'm like, well,
exactly.
see, I think I was kind of born for this because I had a son when I was 15 years old. And do I regret having my son? No, I love my son. My son's a great kid. If I had to do it again, would I do that? No, I would not. And I think that we've got to learn to hold both those things without, like you said, the shame, blame, and guilt. We've got
That's
to be
called
able.
This Is It.
Yeah, is it
That's
okay?
called This Is It.
Yeah, we got to look
Yeah.
like honestly and authentically, and that's what we're up to here at Confronting the Line. So thank you for being our resident
Thanks.
expert.
Thanks to all of you.
Yeah, and thank you to all of our guests. Have an awesome weekend, and we'll see you next time on Confronting the Line.